Joining me right now is Kentucky Senator, member of the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee and Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Rand Paul. Senator, it's great to see you this morning. Thanks very much for being here. You were at that hearing yesterday. Take us behind the closed doors. What did you take away from that?
I would say it was one of the most exciting hearings I've been to in years. It was explosive. There was raw emotion on both sides. But there is a serious point here. And I think if you want less fraud in our elections, you want the elections to be legitimate and considered to be illegitimate, you have to punish those who committed fraud. So 1,500 people were ineligible to vote because they were deceased in Nevada. Whoever did that needs to go to jail. 4,000 illegal aliens voted. They need to not be allowed to vote, but whoever allowed it to happen needs to go to jail. It needs to be fixed. So we really do have a lot of work to try to make sure our elections are legitimate. And this is not new. I remember the famous story about LBJ. It's midnight and he's got a scotch in one hand, he's got his illegal votes in a shoebox in the other, and he turns them in at midnight saying, "We've won, we can turn in our illegal votes, so we've got just enough." But then his opponent turns his illegal votes in at 2 in the morning, and LBJ vowed that night never to turn his illegal votes in until the other guy had already turned his in. And so we have a history of cheating in our country. In my state, a guy named Pritchard, who was part of the kitchen cabinet for FDR, went to jail. But if you don't put people in jail for stuffing the ballot box, then you will get more of it. So, yeah, I think the hearing was important and just the beginning. The problem we have in our country is courts don't like to hear this stuff during elections and right after elections. The history is bad. My dad had an election stolen in 1976, and the courts would never give us justice and never listen to the facts. They kept doing what they're doing to President Trump, which is throwing the cases out based on procedural technicalities, but not on the facts.
Well, I mean, these are facts that everybody on each side of the aisle should want spotlighted. I mean, you just spotlighted at least 3 cases of fraud. Why wouldn't everybody want to ensure that there's confidence in our election? The same thing is happening, I feel like, on the intelligence assessment. John Ratcliffe, the DNI, wants to come out with this intelligence assessment. It's due tomorrow on Friday, and he's not going to sign on to it unless there's a fair debate about what China did and whether or not there was Chinese interference in this election. We know that the pandemic changed everything. Here's the DNI on this program telling us about the pandemic's impact, not just about killing hundreds of thousands of people in America, but what it did to our election. Take a listen.
Here in the United States, the pandemic influenced a lot about how people voted, but also how they had to vote. As a result of the pandemic, we saw state legislatures as little as 90 days before the election adopting new voting procedures. Essentially, we had universal mail-in balloting across this country in a way that we hadn't seen before. To that point, almost 73% of the American people this year voted before Election Day, a good percentage of those by mail. That's about an 80% increase over anything we've ever seen before. So it's a little wonder that we see what's happening around the country as a result of that, with mail-in balloting and all of the questions and the questions that are being raised in lawsuits and by everyday Americans about what happened in the election.
Senator, shouldn't we all agree on all sides of the aisle that there was a serious situation with China and that upset our vote?
Well, I think the Democrats for a long time have wanted mail-in voting. It's much easier to solicit votes that way from people who don't traditionally vote and are lacking in a lot of information about the country. But it's a way for them to expand to that vote that is typically Democrat. But I think they purposely used the pandemic to transform our elections. And in many ways, not only was it illegal as far as non-citizens or people voting twice, but it also, the election law was changed by people who have no constitutional right to change it. Secretaries of states, governors changed the law without the permission of the legislature. So yes, we have to do something about that, and that is a legal question. And I think the courts have gotten it wrong so far, and the courts haven't even really listened to the argument. They just dismiss these cases. But the idea that a Secretary of State can change election law without the legislature passing that is completely against every tenet of a state constitution as well as the federal constitution.
Yeah, and that was the basis of the Texas lawsuit, and the Supreme Court wouldn't even hear it. Senator, I want to get to the COVID relief story, but let me just get your take on the Georgia race. Are we going to see the same situation in Georgia on January 5th, where there were more ballots than actual people who voted, where there were ballots that weren't even folded, meaning they were never in an envelope, where the envelopes were separated from the ballots so you couldn't compare the signatures?
Well, there were 1,700 people that we heard voted twice. The Secretary of State needs to prosecute every one of them and deter them from doing it again. Their votes shouldn't be counted. There are thousands of people who voted from the wrong address in Georgia. Those people need to be taken out of the system, and they need to either re-register from a legal address or be prevented from voting from an illegal address. I don't know that they're doing any of that. And probably most importantly, they're mailing out a solicitation. They're mailing everybody out a solicitation to vote by mail. And this is not in the state law. This is something that has been created out of whole cloth by the Secretary of State. But if they do it again, yes, I'm very, very concerned that if you solicit votes from typically non-voters, that you will affect and change the outcome. So I'm very worried that Democrats will control all three branches of government, and they really, truly will transform America, but not for the better.
Wow, that is extraordinary. If there is not policing in place in Georgia, I don't know what to say. Let's talk about this closing in on the COVID relief and government funding, Senator. The bipartisan $900 billion stimulus package apparently on the table. It includes individual checks, around $600 to $700 a person. No state and local or business liability protection is included in this bill. Negotiators are close to an agreement on a $1.4 trillion spending package to avoid a government shutdown on Friday at midnight. What can you tell us about all of this, Senator? Where are we? Do you support these deals?
The one thing you typically get compromise around here for is spending money we don't have. Last year we spent $3.3 trillion we didn't have. We had to borrow. This year, this new package, and I suspect it will pass, it'll be $2 trillion more in additional debt. So it's a problem. I don't think this much debt is good for a country. We're up to 138% of our GDP with our debt. So there's a real problem where we are, and there's going to be a day of reckoning. I don't support it. I think the way that the economy opens up and the way the economy can recover is simply by opening up again. There's no science to keeping schools closed. There's actually no good science that keeping the restaurants closed is doing this. In fact, there's no real science that anything we have done has changed the trajectory of this other than the vaccine. And so it appalls me when I see these so-called TV doctors on other channels saying, oh, just wear a mask. You don't need to get a vaccine. The mask is more important to protect you than the vaccine. Well, 80% of the people getting the virus that are positive with the virus have been wearing the mask the whole time. They'll tell you we wear it all the time and we still got it. So it is malpractice to tell people the mask is enough to protect you. People should go for a vaccine, absolutely.
Yeah, and also to say that the science tells us to close down restaurants. Where do they get this?
It's arbitrary, it's capricious, and it's an example of authoritarianism. That's why we should never give so much power to one person.
Yep. Senator, it's great to see you this morning. Please come back soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Senator Rand Paul joining us this morning in D.C.